This is Now This News. Recently, in conjunction with the Emerson Collective, they released a video titled How Restrictive Voting Measures Impact Americans with Disabilities. Let's take a look.
Thinking back to the spring 2019 election, it was extremely difficult to vote. Spring in Wisconsin means snowy weather and ice, and since I don't drive, I had to drive my wheelchair there. It didn't have sidewalk all the way, and even the sidewalk that it did have really wasn't friendly for use for my wheelchair. So I was like, well, I guess I gotta drive down the middle of the street to get to my polling location. So I did.
This woman, Stephanie Birmingham, stated that she lives in Wisconsin, and when she claims that it was extremely difficult to vote, it's completely on her. Why? Because Wisconsin has no excuse absentee voting. That means instead of driving her wheelchair through adverse conditions to get to the polls, she could have voted by mail.
Wisconsin is comprised of a lot of rural, small-town communities that don't have access to public transportation. That makes it difficult to get to a polling place.
Then vote by mail. Problem solved. Good night, everybody. Then Ms. Birmingham talks about how proposed bills would limit who can return your absentee ballot.
The bills, suggested that only, a family member or one designated person could return the ballot, to violate that would result in severe criminal charges.
She is referring to Senate Bill 203 that would have essentially put a ban on ballot harvesting and limited who can handle mail-in ballots. For example, a family member or a designated person like a caregiver or friend could deliver a voter's ballot. The provision in the bill would prevent political operatives from going door to door, collecting mail-in ballots, and dropping them off at the local election board or the post office. Allowing ballot harvesting is an opportunity for politically motivated groups to potentially tamper with or even misplace ballots. And when they go door to door, they can possibly intimidate voters. And that's bad, right? Well, it's only bad when Republicans do it, but you knew that already. Anyway, Ms. Birmingham keeps going and says that the law would be bad because not every person that is disabled has people in their life to deliver a ballot for them.
It seems to operate on this premise that somehow people with disabilities just have folks waiting at their beck and call to sort of just help, or that family is just always available.
However, her argument seems to operate on the false premise that the disabled don't have mailboxes to mail in their mail-in ballots. Now, what's really crazy is that Stephanie Birmingham is a disability rights advocate. So instead of showing how voters can successfully navigate that system so that they can vote, she's claiming, without evidence I might add, that people like her are victims of an unjust system that doesn't want them to vote. Take, for example, where Birmingham is critical of the state's voter ID law.
Well, actually, there's a lot of folks who don't have driver's license, and it's really common within the disability community.
Well, of course, not everyone drives, but you can still get a state ID.
There's the thought of, okay, well, what about just getting a state ID?
Yeah, I just said that.
Well, to get a state ID, you still got to go to the DMV because you can't apply for a state ID online.
But it should be pointed out that in Wisconsin, if you want to renew your existing driver's license or state ID, in most cases, you can renew it online.
So, okay, if you don't drive, how do you get to the DMV?
Man, that is a quandary, huh? I mean, if you can't get to the DMV without a driver's license, then how do millions of people a year who don't drive get to the DMV to get their learner's permit so that they can start driving if they don't drive? Or maybe they could just take a taxi or a Lyft or something, I don't know.
It's not just as simple as, oh, go get your driver's license, or just, oh, go get your state ID and you're set to go.
No, it is that simple. But you know what? Let's play her a little game and say that it's totally impossible for you to go to the DMV to get a state ID. It's a problem that can never ever be solved. Sad, really. So if you can't get an ID, then you can't vote, right? Wrong. What this disability rights advocate isn't telling you is that even if you don't have an ID in Wisconsin, you can still vote, because Wisconsin allows voters to declare indefinitely confined status, which allows them to vote by mail without having an ID. According to the Wisconsin Elections Commission, voters who are indefinitely confined due to age, illness, infirmity, or disability may request that a ballot be automatically sent to them for each election. Indefinitely confined voters do not need to provide a photo ID with their absentee ballot request. And that's weird, right? I mean, it's almost like Wisconsin wants people to vote. Yet the video falsely claims that Wisconsin has one of the strictest voter ID laws in the country. But if you consider that some people can vote absentee without an ID, you can't say the laws are strict. That's obviously not true. Now, before you go, but Andrew, what about people who don't qualify for indefinitely confirmed status? State IDs cost money, and having to pay a fee to get a state ID is like a poor tax. Well, my response to that would be, you can get a free Wisconsin state ID card, and all you need is a birth certificate, social security number, or a utility bill or phone bill.
Even if you don't have a birth certificate or other documents, the DMV will still help you get a free ID for voting after one visit to their office. You'll need to complete an application for a free state ID. Just make sure to check the box that says Free ID for voting purposes, and remember to bring it to the ballot the next time you vote.
So instead of sharing that valuable information with the audience, Now This News and the Emerson Collective just want to show people complaining about policy, even if that policy doesn't actually restrict anyone from voting. Gee, you think they have an agenda? Anyway, in this same video, we hear from Barbara Beckert, the director of Disability Rights Wisconsin in Milwaukee. Here she speaks about an incident from 2018 where someone was actually prevented from voting through no fault of their own.
The most egregious one that I can recall was a young man in Madison. He went to vote in Wisconsin, and he was told, if you don't speak your name and address, we're not giving you a ballot. Well, he was deaf. He doesn't speak aloud. He uses ASL to communicate, and the poll worker was not accepting that and not satisfied with that.
Okay, this needs some explanation. Wisconsin law requires that when you go to vote in person, you need to present poll workers proof of your identification and vocally state your full name and address. So if you're required by law to state your name and address and you're physically unable to speak, that means that you can't vote, and that is voter suppression. And so, Ms. Beckert's advocacy group lobbied to change the law. And in 2019, the Republican-controlled legislature did just that. An elector is not required to state his or her name and address if the elector is unable to do so. That person can ask an election official or someone else to state it for them. And this is the way things are supposed to work. A problem was identified and it was resolved. So the question is, why did Now This News and the Emerson Collective bring it up now? It was fixed 2 years prior. The answer is because they really wanted to make a video about restrictive voting measures, but didn't actually have any examples of how people are currently being quote-unquote restricted. And with that, I'll make this promise. If you see a current law or policy that legitimately prevents anyone from voting, let me know on Twitter @Don'tWalkRun. Then I will make a video about it and we will advocate for that change. Anyway, thanks for watching and hope to see you next time. If there is next time.